We're back to South Africa. Our next speaker is Emilia Potenza. She's the curator of exhibitions and education at the APARTHEID Museum in Johannesburg. She's passionate about history, education, art, and the intersection between them. She and her colleagues create opportunities for a wide range of visitors to engage with South Africa's history and to draw on the crucial lessons that this offers. Emilia has been involved in fighting racism through education. As a student and then a teacher, she was actively involved in opposing apartheid in the late 1970s and 80s, principally through building South Africa's first non-racial teachers' organization. She also wrote many groundbreaking history and English textbooks, and she worked at the APARTHEID Museum since its inception in 2001. And the title of her presentation today is Can't Remember, Can't Forget, Curating the South African Truth and Reconciliation Process. Please. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
There we go. Well, like my colleagues, I would really like to thank the Hunt Dink Foundation for bringing us here today and for all the others who have made this conference possible. I think it is a wonderful opportunity for us to hear each other, to meet each other, and hopefully to collaborate with each other further going forward in the work that we're doing. My presentation, the title of my presentation comes from the work of a South African artist, Sue Williamson, who has done a whole body of work on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And she describes why she referred to her body of work in this way. And it was based on her listening to hours of testimony from victims and perpetrators during our Truth Commission, which I'll talk about in much more detail as I go on. And she said that one of the things that was very striking to her is that a constant refrain of the perpetrators in giving evidence was, I can't remember. And a constant refrain of the victims was, I can't forget. And that's really what is going to frame what I'm talking about as I go forward in this presentation. I'm going to begin by just giving you a little bit of background to the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg, South Africa, of which I'm the curator. I assume that most of you won't have been there. And so just to give some sense of the broader context of the museum. It is clear that the destruction of apartheid was a triumph of the human will, and that it required the combined efforts of countless people from all racial groups, and both genders and all. But South Africa still bears the wounds of apartheid and of the struggle against it. If these are to heal fully, and if South Africa is to develop into a truly non-racial society, the past must be grappled with and understood. This is the reason for the Apartheid Museum. So we try to begin by challenging some basic premises that people seem to have about apartheid. Firstly, not to see it as simply a battle between good and evil and that the good guys won. Or to conclude, as many South Africans, that it's all over and that it doesn't matter anymore, or that Mandela single-handedly conquered apartheid. You know, this is a myth that we constantly are having to challenge, or that the demise of apartheid was in fact inevitable. What we try and show is that ordinary people were involved on both sides, that racism is dangerous and very widespread, that the struggle to defeat apartheid was heroic and monumental, but also flawed, and that apartheid left a massive legacy that will take time and effort to overturn, and that it shaped our cities, our society, and ourselves as individuals. And the legacy of apartheid is still 25 years later with us in profound ways. So we get about 1,000 visitors a day, and these are divided primarily, 60% of which are school children, a very important part of our audience, and the remaining 40% more or less equally split between South African adults and international visitors. In the last 3 months, these are the countries that we've had visitors from, and for some reason which I can't quite explain, a very big visitorship has come from Brazil in the last 3 months. So now the building. It's built rather like a fortress or a prison and reminds us of the harsh realities of the past. The architecture has won many awards. As you approach the entrance to the museum, there's a moat, and against the backdrop of the prison-like building, and the moat suggests regeneration and hope. And above the moat is the extraordinary quotation from Nelson Mandela: "To be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others." I'm just going to flick through some images. As you enter, you are randomly classified as either white or non-white when you buy your ticket. And you have to enter through the appropriate entrance. So it's, mimics the separate entrances that people were forced to use during the apartheid period. This is in a section of the museum called the Hall of Execution, and there are 151 nooses hanging from the ceiling in that hall. Each one represents a person who was executed for their anti-apartheid activism during the apartheid years, as of course during apartheid we still had the death sentence. Okay, so now on to South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So by an act of Parliament, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came into being in 1996 to investigate the nature, causes and extent of gross human rights violations that were committed from March 1960 to May 1994. It focused on deaths related to killings, abductions, torture and severe ill treatment. And very importantly, it provided an opportunity for people to tell their stories publicly. Chief Justice Ismail Mohammed, who was one of the first black Chief Justices of our Constitutional Court, made this comment: "The TRC Act encouraged survivors and dependents of the tortured and the wounded, the maimed and the dead to unburden their grief publicly, to receive the collective recognition of a new nation that they were wronged, and crucially, to help them discover what in truth happened to their loved ones, where and under what circumstances it happened, and who was responsible." The TRC was in fact the first commission of its kind to conduct hearings in public in the world. And the way it worked is that the hearings were televised live, and every day, every night, for 2 years on the news. I mean, you could watch live the whole day, but obviously not many people did that. But every night, when you watched the news, we would have the hearings brought right into our living rooms. And the effect of that was that nobody could say we didn't know. And we all, watched the horror of the process unfolding. And I'm going to show you a clip just now so you'll get some sense of the experience. There were 3 committees. There was a Human Rights Violation Committee, an Amnesty Committee, and a Reparations and Rehabilitation Committee. I'm going to be focusing on the Amnesty Committee because that is what our exhibit in the museum focuses on. All right, so it took us 20 years from when the first hearing took place in 1996 to curate and open the exhibit in our museum on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to the public. This is now part of our permanent exhibition. One of the things that we've done throughout the museum in the recent years is integrate a layer of art. Until recently, the museum focused very much on documentary history, but we've been given a long-term loan of one of the mining company's art collections, a very extensive contemporary art collection, and we've integrated art throughout the museum. This piece, which is a marble sculpture, was commissioned especially for our TRC exhibit. And the subject matter of this piece is called the wet bag torture method. And in the film, in the TRC installation, which is the centerpiece of the installation, it's a 40-minute film dealing with amnesty hearings. We have selected amnesty hearings, and we've presented it in an auditorium with 3 separate screens, 3 projections with 1 soundtrack. And the film has on one screen a perpetrator, on another screen a victim, and then a commissioner or an advocate. And the testimonies are presented in this way. What you can see here in the middle is a reenactment by the perpetrator, who was Jeffrey Benzine, on Tony Yengeni, the victim, where Yengeni asks Benzine to reenact the method of torture that was used during interrogation. And Benzine gets up and puts a wet bag over Yengeni's face. And they, you know, the method is discussed. That the intention was to try and suffocate the person who was being interrogated, not to the point of death, but just to intimidate and create in the person a feeling of drowning. So this was enacted and shown on television screens throughout the whole country during the TRC process. I'm going to just skip because of time. All right, towards the end of the installation, we have a section on unfinished business, and here we have commissioners, academics, you know, analysing the weaknesses and inadequacies of the TRC, and we also have people who were affected, from the victims and the community, who belong to various organizations, including the Kulumani support group, talking about their unhappiness with the fact that, you know, one of the things that they expected was reparations and compensation, and that for most people it was a once-off payout of 25,000 Rand, which was wholly inadequate. And, you know, there are still many campaigns continuing around reparations. The findings and conclusions of the TRC were that the apartheid government had been the main perpetrator of gross human rights abuses, and that big business had profited from apartheid and should donate 1% of the company's worth to the state as reparations. Of course, this has never happened. The recommendations included calls for the prosecution of those who had failed to engage in the amnesty process or had been refused amnesty. Now, this is very important because the fact that there have been no prosecutions of those who were refused amnesty means that, in effect, everybody got a blanket amnesty. And this has created a lot of unhappiness in South Africa. The compensation, as I said, has been inadequate. There hasn't been sufficient support for healing and rehabilitation, and that policy reforms that were suggested, you know, have not been acted on. So, you know, the post-apartheid government has not taken up the recommendations of the TRC, and there, you know, is a lot of activism going on around that now. And as Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the chair of the TRC, put it, a key weakness of the Commission was that it did not focus sufficiently on the policies or political economy of apartheid. The failure to examine the effects of and impact of apartheid's policies resulted in the need for the perpetrators or the trigger pullers to bear the collective shame of the nation and let those who benefited from apartheid escape responsibility. The link between racialized power and racialized privilege became obscured. I wish we had more time, because that is the subject of so much debate in our society today. Now, we're going to look at one amnesty hearing, that of SIPHIWO MTHUMKHULU, who was an activist in the 1970s and 80s, and he was detained and poisoned and abducted and murdered. So the way amnesty worked is that if you applied for amnesty as a perpetrator and you were found to have told the full truth, you were granted amnesty. And you didn't have to apologize. It, didn't require an apology. So the victim in this case was SIPHIWO MTHUMKHULU, the late SIPHIWO MTHUMKHULU. The perpetrator was Gideon Nieuwoudt, whom you can see on your left. The person on the right in the photograph was a witness protector, one of the members of the witness protection unit. And this was SIPHIWO MTHUMKHULU's mother, who was a key witness and interrogator in the trial. Now I'm going to need some help to get to the film.
He seemed to be addicted, and seemingly he was regarded as influential and being an instigator.
Did you have contact with him in the capacity as security force person? Yes. Did he come across as a strong leadership person? He did. And my impression, with great piety, Your Honour, my impression was that he was extremely militant because of the conflict between the black ideology and the whites really came to the fore.
I was glad that he came back from jail. He spent 5 months, and you could see that he was not the usual SIPHIWO that we know. You could see that something was not right. He stated that there were people who used to assault him. He was ill-treated severely. He even said, "The Boers have finished me." He would take pipes and the electric wire and would hit him, flog him on the back. Nieuwoudt and Roelofs, according to SIPHIWO's details and information, would release or take SIPHIWO and allow him to take his clothes off. He would chain him and said he must lie on the floor. SIPHIWO gives an account of what used to happen to him. He said he would trample on his neck and would move up and down over my body. He would trample me severely. This is SIPHIWO's hair. This is the scalp attached to the hair. That person is not at home. We all know that if you cut a person's hair, you don't cut the scalp. But I want you today to see, Commission, that we have his hair together with the scalp attached to the hair. I want the Commission to witness what I've brought here today so that they should know the effect of the poison which was used to my son. Due to his condition, we took him to the hospital. They stated that they could find the reason for his condition to be due to the poison which he had taken.
Wow, I'm a bull.
I will never forget the Boers. Mama, you can say anything that you'd like to say. Please express yourself as much as you can. This is the most important day for you. I don't want to cry. I understand that this is my day. I don't want to cry. I want to speak.
Probably
if I cry, it won't be due to the pain. It would be due to the hatred. It would be due to the fact that there is no honesty among some people.
You were involved with the abduction of these two persons near to the Holiday Inn in Port Elizabeth, that is correct. Did you sleep that evening and spend the next day there? That is correct, Your Honor. The following evening, did you give the deceased some of these sleeping tablets? That is so. How did you do this? It was in the coffee that I offered them. I put an overdose of the tablets in the coffee and I gave it to them to drink. Can you remember how many tablets you gave the deceased each? I cannot be precise, but it was more than 2 or 4. The prescribed dosage was a half a tablet, that's correct. The deceased went to sleep. They did, Your Honor. You and Mr. van Rensburg, or you, was it you and Mr. van Rensburg carried them out? Mr. van Rensburg and I carried them out. Van Rensburg shot the one person, you shot the other. That is so, Your Honor. Afterwards, the bodies were placed on some wooden stumps. Diesel was put on and they were set alight. That is correct. During the course of the evening, on several occasions, you had to keep the fire going and put on more wood. That is so. After about 6 hours, the bodies were nearly ash. That is correct, Your Honor. The next morning, did you gather the remains and throw these into the fish river? That is correct.
He was the only son. Siphiwo was very much involved.
So what happened afterwards was that, well, firstly, Gideon Nieuwert was granted amnesty. He then decided to ask the family if he could come and visit them in their home and to apologize. And he goes, and the Siphiwo's parents are very gracious, and they do receive him, but they say, sorry, you're too late. You're 15 years too late. No, sorry, we can't accept your apology. And then Siphiwo, who had a son, his son was standing behind his grandparents, took a vase and threw the vase at Gideon Nieuwert. I mean, this is all in the film, and you know, his head is cracked and injured, and his son then is interviewed afterwards to talk about why he did that. And you know, this is all in the film in the museum. What the TRC, the point is made by the TRC and exhibitions that have been done on the TRC afterwards, is that forgiveness and healing are profoundly individual processes and cannot be handled by a committee. A committee that is time-bound cannot hope to bring about the reconciliation of the whole society. National reconciliation is facilitated by speaking openly about what was hidden and what divided the nation. So although our TRC process was apparently the most well-funded TRC process also in history and the longest running, there's still there's still a lot of unfinished business that we deal with as a society, and our exhibit shows that and raises all these issues and the discomfort of it all. We've done visitor research, which I'm going to go through very quickly because I'm out of time. And I think what is particularly striking is that it does, although it creates a lot of discomfort and unhappiness. This is after the happy ending of Mandela's presidency and the transition to democracy. We go back into the heart of darkness to look at what the TRC tells us. It is a call to action for people, which we think, is important, particularly for younger people, and it raises all the kind of issues that are listed in the slide. I'll just give you 1 second to look at that. And particularly the last section of points which relate to the economic inequalities of our society. We are one of the most unequal societies in the world, and the huge gap between the rich and the poor is a fundamental colossus around our necks. So what we found is that most respondents agree that we need to deal with this history, we need to confront it, we need to talk about it, and that the testimony is very important. The aftermath of the TRC and the inadequacies of the TRC people feel are not presented adequately enough. We also are concerned that because almost all the victims were black and almost all the perpetrators were white, it does have the effect of polarizing people racially. And that it's also a traumatic experience, and that the debriefing after this experience is very important, and we are working on those aspects of the museum experience. What I want to end with are just the words of Archbishop Desmond Tutu when he handed over the TRC report to President Mandela at the time. He said, not these words, which I'll just give you a chance to read. He said, "The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and there is no way in which you can assume that yesterday's oppressed will not become tomorrow's oppressors." Thank you.